Hi guys, I'm Espen Kraft, and this is Keyboard Magazine, issue November 1984, and this is Mr. Tony Banks from Genesis. This issue has a lot of cool features, a lot of cool ads in color, so let's spend the next 15 minutes together and I'll take you through them. And here we have him, Tony Banks of Genesis himself. This is Keyboard Magazine, November 1984, and it's a great issue. It's got lots of great ads inside as well. And Tony Banks, well, he's using a plethora of high-end synths of the time, and we'll get back to that feature once we get to it. As always, Korg had the first couple of pages, and what do we have here? Well, you can see the Korg Poly 800 and its module desktop version in the form of EX800. Great synth, the Poly 800. We have the Poly 61M, and you can see a Commodore 64 there as well. That's very cool. And a MIDI synchronizer and a keytar. Lots of good stuff from Korg. The usual note from the editor and what's in this issue. And here we have a great ad right away. The Rowland Juno 106. Sinful is the title of the ad, I see. Rowland makes it happen at the bottom. And also next month's issue will feature Dave Stewart. You can see it to the left there. That's a great color display. Rowland makes it happen. Juno 106. Well, those were the days. Moving on. A profile was always pretty early on in the old issues of Keyboard Magazine. Soundcraft was still going, of course, back then. The 80s was a big decade for Soundcraft mixers. And the seal. Is that the way you said it? Seal? Like in seal? Don't know. Never had a seal synth, actually, or a keyboard. Ibanez, they had a lot of guitar stuff as far as I can remember, and guitars, of course, but I can also remember some of the outboard effects. My local music shop did have some effects of theirs in the store as far as I can remember. Oh yeah, the Chroma Polaris. So it's been a long time since I've seen one live in the flesh, if I can put it like that. But the big thing for them in the early 80s was that it was a 16-bit processor on board. They actually made quite a fuss about that, and they even have a picture of the processor itself that was supposed to sell the synth. But it is a great synth, no doubt about it. I think the bass in True by Spandau Ballet was done on the Chroma Polaris, not a regular electric bass. And the Sequential Circuits Max is a giveaway in this month's issue, I see. The Max is not as well known as some of the other synths from Sequential Circuits. Look at that PBG ad, the wave term and the PBG, is it 2.2 back then? The ad doesn't say. And here we have a long feature on the band Berlin. I know many of you will remember those from Top Gun and the song Take My Breath Away. But the band Berlin had a real career before that movie as well. That was just the end of their era in a way, because they didn't have any major hits after that. But songs like No More Words are really great examples of early 80s synth pop with a lot of cool stuff going. So I definitely recommend you to check out their first albums and singles. And one of the interesting things in this feature is that Dave Diamond, one of the synth guys in the group, he tells us about how they worked on Take My Breath Away with Giorgio Moroder. And in fact, he didn't like Giorgio Moroder at all and pretty much stayed away from him because their personalities didn't match. So he didn't do much on that record at all. And he's a very forth-spoken person, and he has a lot of things saying about this and that in the music business and synth manufacturing business back then. Very interesting read. And another cool ad for the Rhodes, the Stage 73 Mark V. Bill Evans' When I Fall in Love, a great song. I play that on many wedding receptions, and here's a different take on it. I used to think that those articles in Keyboard Magazine where you had famous songs transcribed in different ways like this is very cool. It was very cool. And the sequential circuits, which we have here, the T8, that's the big one on top, the Prophet 600, the drum tracks, drum machine there, and the 6-track. They all look alike. Always like the designs on those old sequential circuits stuff. And here we have Tony Banks and the evolution of Genesis. Now this is the pièce de résistance of this issue. Tony Banks, often referred to as one of the greatest keyboardists of all time, and I always love his pad and string work, and he says quite a lot about different things actually in this feature. Among other things, he talks about how he got involved with the scoring for the film The Wicked Lady. Got the job without the director ever having heard of him. That's very cool. And it goes through a lot of the stage setups he uses on tour with Genesis at the time. And we can see some of it here up in the middle there. Let's see, we see EMU emulator, we see the Sequential Circuits Prophet 10, we see the Synclavier 2, the ARP Quadra, and a Yamaha CP70 Electric Grand, and a Chilton mixer. He says that he doesn't sample at all on the Synclavier, he uses the emulator for that, but the Synclavier is great for making synth sounds, he says. And he also speaks a lot about pitch bend and not being a big user of pitch bend, but he is a big user of aftertouch. And that's the way he expresses the sounds, and he can't fathom why not more manufacturers actually incorporate aftertouch on their synths. It's very important to him. And the feature will continue after we have Nick Rhodes' display here. We're in the middle of this issue right now. And the Akai AX80, that was my first synthesizer. I can't say I like the sound of it all that much, but it sure looks the part. You'll be hard-pressed to find a better looking synth than the AX80. Let's continue with Tony Banks. He says he uses chorus all the time on the sequentials. In fact, he seems to use a lot of chorus on his synths. Not very shocking, because most synths benefit from a dash of chorus. He says he, Mike Rutherford, and Phil Collins would often jam hours at a time while the tape recorder was recording, and they'd listen back to the parts the next day and transcribe out what they did in detail so they could use it for different parts when they build up songs later from those rehearsals. And the Lindrum, of course, a beautiful original ad for the Lindrum. Now a new price, $2,495 in 1984. It was expensive, that's for sure. The Tony Banks feature comes to an end, and it's funny to think about that. The next album they did was Invisible Touch, and that really put them into the mainstream, and just great, a great band. And I especially love Tony Banks because I'm a keyboardist myself, and I always love how he phrases chords and use inversions and just find the right notes for each chord he uses. A lot of inspiration to be had from listening to Tony Banks. Well, moving on. That wasn't so bad. A great color ad for even more sequential circuits. The 6-track and the drum tracks. Cool. Victor Feldman, not someone I know very much about because I've never been much into jazz or jazz sessions, but I do know something about the Octave Plateau Voitra 8. That's a legendary synth. And just look at that and check out New Order's Perfect Kiss to see it live in action. That Victor Feldman feature is also pretty long. I won't go through all that, but I can show you that cool keyboard stand down to the left there. We're past that already. guitar player. I remember that in my local music magazine store. You could order back issues. Anders Jensen, are you watching? This is the Technics Sxk 250 keyboard. I know you like these. I like them too. I actually played this a number of times. I never bought it. I bought the 350 a little later, but Technics, they were big back then. And moving on towards the end of a keyboard magazine. Here it would be the vinyl that was always shipped with the magazine back then. And many of these smaller features in Keyboard Magazine was always very interesting to me. And I can see that it's not perhaps as inviting today, but I always try those examples and learn a lot from them when I try to master the keys back then as an 11, 12-year-old boy. On my first keyboards, there were no pitch benders, but I could always read tutorials or features on how to use it effectively. And so also in this issue. Kurzweil up there to the right. A name associated with expensive gear back then. The envelopes, a little feature on that. That's very important to master as a synthesist. You have the attack, decay, sustain, and release portion of a simple ADSR waveform. And he uses the roller coaster terminology to explain how the envelope works. How long, how fast, how high, and how soon for the release to come. Perfect pitch, perfect tempo. Some harpsichord MIDI stuff. And what do we have here? At this time, Bob Moog always had a little feature in Keyboard Magazine on different things, subjects, topics. But what do we have here? We didn't build it to beat the competition. The bit one is the competition. Very cool sounds. It has digital sounds. It has analog sounds. The ad says. And the expander coming soon. That would be the bit 01, I think. Very cool synth. I have this in my collection and I use it a lot. The sound and the feel will convince you that this is the best synthesizer to come out in 3 years. Especially for those who couldn't decide on digital versus analog. And they actually specify the best in the last 3 years. That's a pretty bizarre ad. And here we have a little cool article on Motif Recognition, where they use a little snippet out of Johann Sebastian Bach and how he uses different lead motives in different ways to really vary a composition and really plant that motive into the listener's brain as a kind of musical inception. I'd like to have one of those old sweatshirts from back then, really vintage and retro. And here we have a review of the digital keyboard Synergy 2 Plus. If any of you have any experience with this setup, please say so in the comment section. I'd love to hear what it was like to use. PV and Garfield Electronics, some adapter stuff. Does any of you have those lying around? And not much left in this issue now. Spec sheets. Lexicon Digital Reverb. The Yamaha Portable. The Ultimate Support stands. And here we have another stand with some Oberheims. Is that the OB8? Yes, and the DSX sequencers and a couple of drum machines, the DMX series. Well, that was all for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this ride back to 1984, to Keyboard Magazine, and a little flashback to those nice, colorful ads of what is now considered vintage synthesizer and gear. Before I close up shop today, let me thank these people. Anders Jensen, Karsten Brinkmann, Cowsnap, David Ryle, Felix Bowman, Gnair, Jan Tuchek, Carl Bate, Michael Brannon, Nathan Furman, Rich Jones, Tailtrap, Teddy McSnuggins. Thanks guys for all the support, you're awesome. I'm Espen Kraft, I am the 80s. Until next time, cheers.